Hey there everybody, welcome. Out here doing some boat maintenance again. Today we're going to be changing out a set of bearings and basically everything that goes along with it on one of my brake hubs on my boat trailer. Right in front of me I got kind of everything you'll need, so let's walk through that and then we'll get to work. First thing here, breaker bar. I keep that on hand just in case I can't get those lug nuts off when I get going. Sometimes they're kind of seized on there and a breaker bar is handy to have. An adjustable wrench, crescent wrench. You could use pipe pliers or whatever. Just something to get on that bearing nut. Especially towards the end you'll need that to kind of preload and set those bearings when we're done. A socket. I really only have this because I'm doing a brake axle. You need a socket to get on the caliper mounting bolts. You can use an impact on the top one, but in my experience, most of the time the bottom one lines right up with the leaf springs. And then the impact I keep on hand to use for the lug nuts and kind of whatever else odd stuff comes up. A screwdriver. This is just an old one. You'll see in the video I use this sometimes to beat on races and things. It's also handy for pulling the plug out of your cap. A brass punch. Now this is what you should be using to drive your races in and out. As I just said, I do not always do that. But best practice is use a brass punch on that. And then a side cutters. Really handy for taking your cotter pin in and out, bending it around and stuff. Real nice to have one of these. And so that's pretty much everything we need. I also keep some gloves and paper towels on hand, plenty of them. You're gonna get a little bit messy here, but you can kind of minimize it with that and kind of keep grease from getting on everything else with that. So with that, let's jump down to the wheel and we'll get started on this. This is a really good example here of where I wanted to start. I wanted to start with how you test them. And so one of the first things I always do is I jack it up off the ground. This is a front tire, it's a non-braking axle, so you don't need to take the tire off or anything. But I jack it up and the first thing I'm going to do is spin it. And you can hear right here, nothing. And that's what you want to hear. Now after that, try and work it back and forth, side to side, top to bottom. If you feel give there, that means your bearings are starting to wear. This is a Dexter Vault system, or I think it's originally a UFP. Dexter owns them now. And so they are technically maintenance free for 5 years, and then they say you can go to 10 if you buy their extended warranty. I probably won't go to 10, but I'm on year 3 I think this year, and they still sound really good on this one. This was a new axle a couple years ago because I was having some issues with it, so that's why this has the Vault set up on it a little different, and it still looks good. As you can see, no noise, spins really freely. If you have actual grease like red and tacky or any type of grease like that, you probably won't get this full free spin like this. The Vault grease is a lighter, they call it a hybrid grease. It has a lower viscosity, turns to an oil as it heats up, and so that is a really smooth grease, and it kind of allows this free movement. Now tonight I'm going to do a brake axle back here, and on a brake axle you won't be able to do this. You'll have to take the tire off and remove the caliper to test that. And so we'll show that first. I know I'm going to replace some things on this one because I had a little bit of an oil or a grease leak, excuse me, last year. So we'll jump into that and I'll show you everything I do. So as I mentioned, you can hear that's the brakes rubbing. That's why you won't be able to do this on a brake axle. So in order to test this one, first thing we're going to do is get the wheel off. One thing I should mention, if you're doing the bearings, if you're replacing your bearings, having an issue on the side of the road, if you have a non-brake axle, don't take the wheel off if you can get away with it. I have these covers on, I have to take the wheel off, but if you don't have these, leave the wheel on and just take your hub off, because that way you've got the wheel to hold it up off the ground while you work on it. We're in the shop here, I've got a workbench I'm going to work on, so we're going to go ahead and pop this wheel off and get to the hub. Alright, next thing we're going to do here, since this is a brake axle, is we're going to take the caliper off. I'm going to crack them loose first, and before I let them totally down, I'm going to take a bungee or you can tie it up to something, whatever. I'm just gonna run a bungee around my fender here and hook this on. It's not gonna totally hold the caliper in place, but it's just gonna keep it from totally falling away and that brake line kinking or anything like that. So we'll crack them loose first, because they can be, oh, not too bad. They can be a little stubborn on there. The top one, you'll be able to get an impact gun on. Normally the bottom bolt on any of them that I've ever seen lines right up with the leaf spring. And so you need just a standard size, standard length, 1/2-inch socket on a ratchet. Pull the bottom one out. Top one, we'll hook it up first before we pull that one all the way out. We'll just slide them up in there. Like I said, that won't keep it from, it won't keep it immobile or anything, but it'll just keep it from totally falling away when this top caliper bolt comes out. And now, depending on how tight your brakes are, not too bad. See, and it'll just hold it there like that. The brake line's not pinched, and so you're not going to do any damage to that. So now here's the point. If you're just testing your hubs, you can hear there's really no noise, no play. This is a pretty good hub. Now the only reason I'm changing it is because I know that my wear sleeve in the back here has some grooves in it. I didn't think it was too bad, so I didn't change it last year when I did these. And of course, shortly after I replaced everything, it started to leak a little bit. And so rather, I could probably deal with this for quite a while. We're going to Canada here in about a month, and so rather than worrying about whether this is going to start really leaking or not, I'm just going to take care of it right now. An ounce of prevention buys you a lot of peace of mind on the road. So first things first, to get this hub cover off, I'm just going to take a rubber mallet. You can use really anything. You can even use a screwdriver in there. I don't like to do that because you could ding up that hub, and it's much easier just to pound it off. I'm not going to reuse this. I've got new ones, so I could just hit it off with a real dead blow hammer. If you're going to reuse it, definitely use a rubber one. Otherwise, you'll dent these up real bad. But let's just get that off. And so I hit that quite a bit harder than I normally would, because I know I'm not going to reuse it. In fact, it went flying when it came off of there. I'll find it. But as you can see, I don't know if you can see that on camera or not. Nice blue grease. Looks really good. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to grab some paper towels. We're going to clean all this up and get the cotter pin out. Okay, we got that cleaned off. I also got some of these latex gloves on. Just helps you not get quite so messy. Next thing, we're going to get that cotter pin out. We're just going to, I found a side cutters is by far the best thing to use on these. Get that straightened out, and then you can grab here. Oh, and that one just pulled right out. Sometimes you kind of have to grab it here and pry up, but that one just pulled straight out. We'll throw that away. We're going to use a new cotter pin every time. Just kind of a best practice deal again. This nut, yeah, I'm able to back that off with my fingers, and that's not uncommon. You really should not have that tight enough that you really need a big wrench or anything to take it off. We'll get to that when we put it back on, how to preload that and then set the nut so you're proper. But for the most part, if you've got to back it off with a wrench more than just maybe getting it started, if it's stuck on there a little bit, it was probably put on too tight. So next, what we have in the hub is we have a big washer, and this will be pretty common. Big washer, then our outer bearing, and then there's a little gap, inner bearing, and then our seal. And so we're just going to take all that off at once, put my thumbs on the washer or thumb, and pull it off right like that. And so if I take these off here, here's our washer. I'll leave that here. And the rest of this, I'm gonna go set on the workbench and we'll deal with the hub later. We're gonna start first looking at the spindle. Okay, so we got the hub over on the workbench. We'll get to that in a second. For right now, we're gonna look at this spindle. So first thing we're gonna do is clean it off because it's hard to look at it. It's all full of this gunk. And because mine had a leak, we were picking up some dust and dirt and stuff in there from all that oil being back behind it. So I'm gonna wipe that off good as I can. Clean the threads up, clean the seal surfaces up. You can see there's a little bit of discoloration here. At one point, that likely means that our race was beginning to spin on this. Now, I don't recall if that was there last year when I did it. It feels okay. It's possible that it just didn't get enough preload on it to set that race, or we had a bearing that was beginning to go bad at one point, and as the bearing starts to lock up, depending how much force there is holding this on the spindle, as the bearing begins to lock up, that inner race will begin to spin on this, and that's what will give that discoloration. This one doesn't look too bad. You want to keep an eye on that. If you get too much of that, it's best just to either have a new spindle welded on or even just replace the axle. But this one feels okay, so I'm not going to get too worried about it yet. I wonder if you can see those grooves in there. Hard to see. They're not all that bad, but in fact it's just that outside one that's bad, but that must be right where I'm riding. And so I'm just going to replace this. This is on a Dexter axle or a handful of other manufacturers. You'll have this wear sleeve, and what that is just a real thin stainless steel piece that slides over that, and that way your seal will eat into that rather than eating into the axle itself, the spindle itself. And so rather than needing to replace an axle, if you start getting wear that is too deep, you simply cut that off, pound a new one on, and you're good to go. So we're going to do that. Let me go grab a couple tools to get that off, and we'll get that going. All right, I put a light in here. Hopefully that helps you see things back here a little bit. Basically what I'm going to use to get this off, I'm going to use a Dremel and just lightly score this. And then I'll use a hammer and a chisel, or a hammer and a screwdriver, and pound that off. You don't want to get too deep into this or you'll score the spindle. If you do that, not the end of the world. Just fill it in with like some JB Weld or something after you file it off with some emery cloth. So let's cut this off quick. There it went. I could hear it snap when it popped, when it released the back there. There it goes. You see how it spun there? Now sometimes you can spin that off, otherwise if you just keep tapping it around it'll loosen. There we go. That's right off. We'll throw that away. And then we're going to look at that spot. We did a pretty nice job. Yeah, in fact, there's nothing there I'd be too worried about. You can see there's an O-ring in there, and I managed to do this on both sides. I did not score the O-ring on either side, so we'll just leave that O-ring there. I'm going to clean that up a little bit, and I'll hit this with a little emery cloth just to make sure there's no high spots here. And then after we do that, we'll be ready to put some red high temp Permatex on it and give it a new wear sleeve. You don't have to hit this very hard. I just essentially want to make sure that there's no high spots, because when I pound the new one on, I can feel a little, oh, that's the hole I'm feeling. That's the hole for my Spindle lube setup. Feels pretty good. You can see there, you might be able to see there's just a little bit of an indentation there from where I hit it with the Dremel, but not bad at all, and it's small enough that it'll just fill right in with the Permatex. If you do get a little bigger gouge, I got a slightly bigger one on the back side and the other side. I just filled that in with a little bit of JB Weld, let that cure, and then sanded it smooth. I don't know that that's proper. You know, check your manuals and all that, but that has worked out well enough for me. Get some of that greasy gunk cleaned up behind there. Make sure we've got no high spots. And our new air sleeve is here. It has already got a hole in it, and so all I'm going to do is take a Sharpie and I'm going to make a line on that just to give myself a little guide when I go to line this up. And so just like that. You don't need to do that, totally optional, just helps me line it up when I put it on there. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to take some high temp red RTV gasket maker. I'm going to put a little bit around here, just a real thin layer. You don't want to cake this on or anything. Just enough that you're going to kind of, if you've got imperfections in there, it's going to fill it in. Just going to keep it from potentially leaking any water through there. That O-ring will do that. This is sort of just an extra added layer of protection. Not necessary by any means. And so we're going to slide this on and just kind of get it started with our hole pointed right at the hole in the spindle there. Then I'm going to take, this is just, I think it's 1.25 inch galvanized pipe with a coupling on the end and a cap on the other end. And this slides right in and rests over the seal of that wear sleeve. You don't want to get too aggressive with this because you don't want to bend out or manipulate the sides of that wear sleeve. So just take your time and tap it on nice and easy. And there we go. You can see we're all the way to the back there, and we got some red RTV coming out the back, a little bit coming out the front. We'll want to make sure we get that cleaned up. It's getting pushed out under there. Probably not going to hurt anything. I just get a little paranoid about having basically anything that can get in at my bearings. So we'll clean that up, wipe this up, and then we'll go over to the bench and work on the hub. I skipped a step. Before we go to the bench, we're going to run a little grease through here just to clear out any RTV that may have gotten down inside the grease hole. We don't want that to cure in there. So we'll put our grease gun on the end, and we'll just pump some through, make sure that's nice and clear, and wipe it off. Now we're ready to go work on the hub. All right, well, I just hit the first race out, didn't realize I did not get record hit. So I'll show you in the second side. Basically, I'm just going to use this rounded off screwdriver. It's not significantly rounded off, but it doesn't have a real sharp point on the end. And so that way I don't gouge up the inside of the hub. Best practice, use a brass drift. What I found, if you get a really tight race, those can be a real bear to get going anywhere, and then you end up just chewing up the punch more so than making any progress on your race. So I'm just going to use this screwdriver, being real careful with it. If I ding anything up in the hub, we'll clean that up before we put the new race in, but should be fine. Then we're just going to go back and forth like that, hitting on either side. You can give it some pretty good wax, but for the most part, don't get in a hurry. Just walk it out of there. And eventually what usually happens is you'll feel where it kind of breaks free, and all of a sudden you'll have a little more give to it. And that's kind of what that was right there. So it'll start moving a little faster now. Still not going to get in a hurry, just going to go back and forth. And there we go, she popped out. So once again, I'm going to save this race. If you do not have, I've got a punch set here for setting races and seals and things. If you don't have one and you need to set your races, what you can do is take the old ones and either take them to a grinder and file off the outside so they'll slide in and out real easy, or you can simply make a cut in here with like your angle grinder, and then you can use these to drive your new races in and they'll pull right out. So either one of those work really well if you don't have a seal driver kit. So now let's get the new bearings out. We'll do the back side first. Once again, we're gonna go through this, wipe this down, make sure that's good and clean and that we don't have any little dings or nicks in there. And so once I'm satisfied with that, I mean, ideally even take this and put it on your parts cleaner. At least hit it with some brake clean here. Get some of this gunk out. On the inside mostly I'm talking, that outside stuff is more just gonna bug me. So we'll spray her down with some brake clean. Get that wiped out real good. And make sure it's good and dry before you do anything. But also, you don't really want to be cleaning once you've put bearings in. You know, if you put this back bearing in, flip it over and find out your front side is still pretty dirty, you don't really want to be doing that, because then you're going to be knocking grease and dust and whatever other thing into your brand new bearings. And the chances of it causing an issue are probably fairly mild, as long as it's nothing, you know, not chunks, just little dust and stuff. But I'd rather just not take that chance while I'm traveling down the road. So we're just going to get it good and clean before we even start. Pretty good. Okay, let's put our races in. If you get a Timken bearing set, it'll come pre-packaged with a bearing inside of a race. Most bearing manufacturers, when you get a bearing from them, will come with a bearing inside of a race like that. I'm going to put new gloves on, simply because we've been using RTV silicone and Permatex, and I've been touching this rusty brake rotor and reaching in there, cleaning stuff out. I've got all sorts of contaminants on those gloves. So just of an abundance of caution, I'm going to swap out gloves before I handle this bearing. Okay. Now when you get your race out of the package, there's a wide side and a thin side. Your wide side is going to go down. If you look at it, I don't know how well you can tell on camera, it angles down and in. And so that's how you know, because your bearing is going to sit in there like this. And you can see that angles tapers down and in. So that's how you know that you're going in right there. Okay, so we'll set that race kind of right where we want it to start. I'm going to put my tool together here quick. I want that nice and straight in there, not angled or anything. And to start, I'm just going to give it a couple light taps, just to get it kind of seated down in there in the beginning. And then once I have it on the run a little bit. Okay, so I've started with just a few light taps and then I threw the camera on the floor. So let's try that again. You can see I've got it going down in there a little ways. Once I kind of get it set down in there, you can hit that a little harder and kind of drive it down in. I'm not ever going to get in too big a hurry, but you can hit that fairly hard. These are aluminum, so you don't really have to worry about damaging that race at all. And you kind of, I don't know if you can hear that on camera, when you get it set down in there, you'll hear a different sound, and that's how you know you have your race all the way down in. You can reach in there and feel, make sure there's no room on the backside, and you're good to go. Okay, so I've got a different hub here. I was recording on that other hub and the batteries went dead on me and I didn't realize it. So This is a spare hub. Process is the same. Obviously this is a non-breaking hub, but for putting the bearings and the seal in here, same process. So we're going to start on the inner bearing. I've already got these greased because I greased these up last night when I was doing that other hub, but greasing the bearings is real simple. I actually use this little tool here. You slide the bearing down on here, you screw this piece on, sandwich it down in there, and then there's a grease fitting here. You just pump grease through it, and so it comes out through your bearing. Real simple. I'll leave a link to that piece down in the description. Once you've got your bearing greased, we're just going to slide it in here. We've got our races in this one. We've got it nice and cleaned out the way we want it. So we'll slide our races down in there. Then we're going to take our seal. Next thing, we're going to set in our seal here. Get that cleaned up. I like to take a little bead of red RTV gasket maker again. Run this around the outside. Absolutely not a necessary step if you're doing a grease axle. This is a step you'll find like if you're doing like the vault system like I've got on my front axle, if you're rebuilding those, or some oil-based ones. For a grease one, not really necessary, but it just to me is a little added layer of protection if you've got uneven spots or defects in your seal or what have you. Just helps to protect against water intrusion. So set that on there, kind of get it started a little bit. Then we'll just take our seal driver. It's the same one we used on the races. Very handy. Once again, I don't remember if I said it, but I'll post the link to this kit down below. It's really nice to have. This kit here. I'll post a link to that on Amazon. It's pretty cheap, very handy if you're going to do this very much at all. And then we'll just drive that in there. These like to get uneven. Just drive her down in here with this thing, you'll get it set. There you go, you hear the tone change, you know we're set. Pull it out and look, you can see we're flat around. We'll clean up that excess RTV. Careful not to get anything down inside here. You don't want any RTV or anything getting into your bearing. That would not be good. Like there's a little speck of dirt right there. Just wipe that out. And this backside's good to go. So we'll flip it over and do the front bearing. Okay, so we're ready to put our hub on. I'm just taking a light layer of grease and I'm going to put it on the wear sleeve and also a little bit just on the inside of the seal lips. You don't need much. I just want a little bit of grease there so that you're not running dry rubber on dry metal. That's just asking to burn up a seal. So just get you a little bit on there. Spin it when it goes on. You'll feel it slide back on there. Spinning it that way you don't catch on anything and tear or cause any issues to your seal back there. And now from here it's just as simple as this is our reassembling how you start it. So we'll put our washer on and then our nut, and here's where we're going to calibrate this or set this. So it's important to have a proper preload here. Specifications on preloading this, I've seen anywhere from 20 foot-pounds to 50. 50 seems excessive to me, but I've seen that. Essentially what you want to do, so we're going to tighten this all the way up by hand. We're still nice and loose here, still no issues. What we're going to do is we're going to take a wrench or a socket or something and put on there. And we're just going to crank that down. Not too hard. And I'm going to continue turning as I do it to make sure I'm not cranking that on there. This is what I'm talking about, the torque specs. Some manufacturers say, you know, 50 foot-pounds, 30 foot-pounds is about the most common. But you just want to get that I can feel resistance, and all I'm doing there is basically shoving all those bearings and races together, and possibly just as important is I'm seating the inner races on the spindle. And you want to get those good and seated back there. That way they are not loose enough to where they're going to start to spin real easy. Obviously, if you get a bearing failure, the bearing locks up, they may start to spin. In fact, that's probably a godsend at that point, because that means the hub didn't just disintegrate. But anyway, you want to get those nice and set on there. And then what I'm going to do from here, I can feel pretty heavy resistance. I'm not going to turn this too much. I just want to make sure I don't totally lock it up, because then I've probably put too much pressure on it. I've just basically done as tight as I could do with just a short little handle here. Now, without spinning it, I'm going to totally loosen this up to where it's finger tight again. Get it totally loose, and then without spinning it, put it back to finger tight. And now from here, I'm just going to adjust this to the level I want. You can see I got pretty good free spinning. It's a little tighter with actual grease than it would be like when you saw me do the front one with the vault on it, and I could just spin it. With actual grease, it's going to drag on the bearings slightly more. But that's nice and smooth. Don't have any issues there. I'm going to take the hub and see, and I don't have any play. I can't pull in and out. I don't have any back and forth. That's perfect. That's exactly how I want it set. So from there, I'm going to take my keeper, and you may or may not have a keeper like this one. They come in a handful of different variations. Quite often, probably the most common one I've seen is the nut actually has keepers on it. With this one, I slide the keeper over. I'll put my cotter pin down and through. Once again, for this, I like side cutters. We'll take the long one and bend it up over the front like that. Get it good and tight on there. Then I'm just gonna cut this other one off. Easier said than done at times. Ooh, must be a good cotter key. There we go. And now, there it is. Make sure you find that other end so it doesn't somehow end up in your bearing. That would obviously not be good. So there, I'm all set there. That's nice and smooth. This being an EZ Lube, you could do one of two things next. Put your cap on or fill your hub with grease. I'm gonna go ahead and slide my cap on. Once again, I'm gonna put a little RTV high temp around the outside of this. That's once again not necessary. It's just that added little protection against water. As you can tell, I'm doing absolutely everything I can to eliminate the chance of water penetration. You're always going to have it when you're dealing with boat trailers. You know, there's really no other situation where you take something, spin it at thousands of RPMs going down the road, and then you turn around and take that high temp piece of metal and dunk it in the water and hope that it doesn't draw any water in. It's really not realistic. But we're going to do everything we can to make sure that happens. And if we take care of this properly, we may not have a perfect setup, but we can get pretty close to perfect to where we don't have to worry about that water too much. And so for me to drive this on, what I found is I just use a hammer, and I'm going to grab a block of wood. Now I don't have the cap on there, so if you don't have the cap on, which I typically don't, because then you're just adding a little air pressure, and I don't want to risk blowing out that seal. It's probably unrealistic. I'm just, once again, extra careful. Clean this off since that cap's not on. You don't want to be banging dirt and dust and things into that cavity. So we'll place it flush. Just start tapping nice and easy. Once again, we're not getting in a hurry. There we go. Okay. That looks pretty good, seated all the way around. We'll wipe this off because I got a little RTV on it. And now with this EZ Lube system, I'm going to grab my gun, and as we're spinning, we're just going to pump some grease in. Okay. And I've been pumping a while now. Just starting to see the grease moving in there. And so I'm not going to totally fill up the cap. I'm just going to push it, pump it I should say, until I've got a nice little layer of grease around that outside. But I don't want this cap full. In fact, when I'm done here, I'm going to take my screwdriver and I'm going to pull some of this grease out of the cap. And so there's sort of a couple schools of thought out there. There are some that would say you shouldn't do this step at all. And the reason being is that you can have that too full of grease and actually cause yourself a failure because of a grease failure, where the grease will doesn't have room to expand, and you'll actually get swirling of the grease and can lead to a grease failure away from the bearing. My thoughts with doing this step are essentially twofold. Number one, there are, in my opinion, many more failures on the side of the road from lack of grease than there are from grease failure, especially using a good quality grease like we're using here. And number two is probably the second, or maybe even actually more common, is water intrusion. And by having this packed full of grease, there's less room for water. Obviously not necessarily going to totally hold grease out, to hold water out I should say, but should provide us a little bit of protection. And this being a synthetic, it can mix with a little bit of water and not have issues, or it's a little bit water resistant without issue. So, but I am going to leave a little room in the cap here. I don't want this totally full because I do want a little bit of room for expansion when this gets hot, if it does get hot. And so the next thing I'm going to do here, I've got that cap how I want it. I've got a nice layer of grease around the outside of the washer, but I've got the openings left here in the cap, the room. I'm going to take my cover and I just put grease around the inside of it. That's just to help keep water from getting through this. And we'll slide that on. Come on now, that one was a little bit stubborn. And we're good to go there. Wipe off the excess grease here. We don't want grease slinging around. Next thing we're going to do is clean this up with a little brake cleaner and stuff, and then we're going to put our caliper back on. Actually, this isn't too bad. Sometimes you really get those full of grease. This one's not too bad. I'll just wipe this up and it seems like it'll be okay. Doesn't hurt to hit this with a little brake clean though. That looks good. That's exactly what we want to hear when we spin our bearings. Nothing. One last thing. Have a look right in behind here just to make sure you don't have any grease leaking. We don't. So let's put this caliper back on. Now, one more thing to keep in mind as we're putting this back together, this RTV, if you use that, does have like a 24-hour cure time. So don't go sticking this right away into the water. But give it a day, and you should be good. These can be a little bit tough to get on sometimes. That one wasn't too bad. Once you got a slit on there, you can usually release your bungee. Looks like we're pretty close. I have added some blue Loctite to these. There's a couple different schools of thought on whether or not you should. There are those that would say you shouldn't and the torque should take care of it. There are those that would say you shouldn't reuse these at all, you should get new ones. I don't feel that is necessary, and these came with blue Loctite on them, so I just have reapplied it, and that's what I'm going with. Get both of those in and started. Absolutely, at this point, have a jack stand, because if my jack were to give way for any reason, and it does happen from time to time, and this trailer were to come down, I would be extremely uncomfortable with the results of that. So it's probably still not overly safe for me to have my head under here looking, but the jack stand makes me feel a whole lot better, and it's cheap insurance if something does happen. So we're going to run both of these down tight. Okay, and now they're both tight. Just going to give it a good snug to torque those on. You can use a torque wrench. In fact, that's the preferred method or recommended approach. I'm just going to give them a good snug up. And I've got the Loctite on there. As long as I get them good and snug, I should be good. Also not gonna over torque those. Don't want to get carried away, but you do want them good and tight. Okay, and now we're gonna put our tire back on and be done with this project. Grab your lug nuts, and one of mine seems to have run off. 5 of them came off. I have 4 here. One thing, if you're using the 2-sided lug nuts like a normal nut, these can only go on one way. If you're using just the, basically this piece, the nuts like that, make sure your tapered end goes in. I only say that because I've seen them installed the other way. That tapered end that goes in there is what centers your tire around that hub. And that's why you pattern torque these also. One of the advantages of that is you get that hub centered on there properly, or that tire centered on the hub, excuse me. So, make sure you do that. I need to find a lug nut. And here it is. So we'll get that 5th one on. And finger tighten all these just to get them kind of started in on that. And all I'm going to do, give them a little hit with that. I don't want to put much pressure on them yet. Just getting them started. And then after that, we'll go back and I'm going to hit them a little harder. Okay. And there you have it. Don't be surprised on your brake hubs if they're a little warm the first time. As you can hear, when those brakes have sat there a little bit like this, they tend to sort of squeeze in, lock up. There's a little bit of corrosion on there. You can see that'll wear off. But I'm going to take it for a little run, get that worn off, let it cool down, and then I'm going to run again for a little ways and check temps and make sure nothing's heating up. If we're getting warm temps on any 4 of these, we'll stop and have to reevaluate. But for right now, I think we got everything good, and this trailer's ready to go fishing. One last thing, you see I just hit these with an impact. Once we drop those, hit those with your torque wrench to make sure that you got those all to spec. But other than that, like I say, we'll test run it, we'll check our temps. This trailer is good to go. Hope everybody enjoyed this video. Hope you took something from it. If you have any questions, please leave them down below in the comments. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.